Welcome to X channel. This is Mr. Mahmoud Sabir, your instructor for this session. Today we are going to study David Copperfield chapter 2. As we knew before that David has a stepfather now, Mr. Murdstone, and today we are going to continue chapter 2, the events of chapter 2. Mr. Murdstone insisted on being present when David is studying. He couldn't concentrate or remember what he had learned, and he was very unhappy. As we see in the picture, that Murdstone is always holding a stick, and that affected badly on David. Mr. Murdstone began to hit David as hard as he could as a punishment for not good in his studies. And of course, we know that Clara has a weak character and couldn't do anything or help doing anything in these situations. First, he locked him in the room and punished him. He hit David as hard as he could many times. And Mr. Murdstone wanted to get rid of David, so he is going to send him away to a boarding school. Mr. Barkis, the cart driver, arrived to take David to his new school. And Peggotty, the servant, gave David a bag full of cakes and 8 shillings in a purse from his mother. Mr. Barkis asked David to give Peggotty a message. Barkis is willing. And that, by the way, that message means that Barkis wanted to marry Peggotty. And one of the main reasons that Barkis wanted to marry Peggotty is that he liked her way of cooking. At the coach station in London, David was collected by a teacher. He is called Mr. Mill, and he was taken to his school, which is called Salem House. The school was a large old building with a dusty playground surrounded by a high brick wall. And Mr. Murdstone sent David to school when it is holiday. That was a kind of punishment for David. The worst thing was a sign around David's neck. He was pushed to hang a sign around his neck and written on it, "Be careful, he bites." David felt ashamed because of the sign around his neck. He was forced to do it, and he was ashamed about this sign around his neck all the time. David succeeded to make friends with Tommy Truddles and James Steerforth at Salem House. James Steerforth asked David to give him the money he has. David discovered that the boys hated Salem House. By the way, when David gave Steerforth the money, he didn't take it just to force him doing this. No, he bought many things like biscuit, wine, and some other things and gave them all to David. So David asked his friends at school like Tom Trotter and Steelforce and the other students to share him with these things. David stayed at Salem House for three more months. It was the Christmas holiday, and David was allowed to visit his mother at this time. David was surprised to find that his mother gave birth of a new baby. When he arrived home, he found that his mother has a new baby. When going back to school, David's mother was standing outside to say goodbye to him. It was the last time to see her. Now, time for exercise. Our first question is, why couldn't David concentrate or remember what he has learned? Because he was worried about the stick that Mr. Murdstone was holding in his hand all the time. David's mother was very sympathetic to him. Illustrate. She was always kind to David and helping him in his studying. How did Mr. Murdstone deal with David? Mr. Murdstone was always cruel and harsh with him and used to threaten him. Where did Mr. Murdstone decide to send David? To a boarding school, as we know. The school name was Salem House. What did Barkis mean by Barkis willing? He wanted to marry Peggy. He wanted to send her a message by David. He asked David to tell her Barkis is willing, and that means he wanted to marry her. What was the worst thing to David at school? There was a sign around his neck says, "Be careful, he bites." As we know, when Mr. Murdstone hit David hard, David got hold of his hand and bit him very hard, and that's why that's the reason that the manager forced David to hang a sign around his neck and written on it, "Be careful, he bites." Now time for quotations. You are making the boy's character worse. Who said this? These words were said by Mr. Murdstone to Clara when she was trying to whisper the answers to David while studying. You must be very careful today. These words were said by Murdstone to David when his mother was helping him to study and he insisted on being present when he studies. They are going to send you away to a boarding school. These words were said by Peggy, the servant, to David when he was punished in his room, and Murdstone decided to send him to a boarding school. A little present from me and your mother. These words were said by Peggy to David when he was going to a boarding school. She gave him a bag full of cakes and 8 shillings from his mother. She has never had any young man. These words were said by David to Barkis when he asked if Peggy is married or she knows any other man. Barkis, as we know, wanted to marry Peggy, so he used David to send his messages to Peggy. I'll take care of it for you. These words were said by Steerforth, David's friend at school, at Salem House School, when Steerforth asked David to give him the money he has. I hope you enjoyed your time with me. Thank you.